There is a war going on in Florida right now. Kind of. Just at a significantly smaller scale than you might think. Look closer. Closer? There. This is Solenopsis invicta, the red imported fire ant. If you live in the southern US, Central America, South America, or the Caribbean, you've definitely had nightmares about these creatures. With a potent venomous sting and the unique abilities to survive floods and build a nest pretty much anywhere, these ants have a tendency to absolutely demolish any native ant competition in their path. But this is not the only fire ant species making its invasive conquest around the world. Meet Solenopsis geminata, a species from Central America making appearances in Africa, Southeast Asia, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. And guess where their ranges overlap? Florida, of course, because Florida is just built different, I guess. I'm Mikey Green, and today we're traveling to northern Florida to investigate this interesting, complex, and severely under-researched interaction between these two fire ant species. Thankfully for me, but unfortunately for the rest of society, it didn't take long to find a colony of Solenopsis invicta.
Alright, what I have in this tube right here is a few individuals of different castes of Solenopsis invicta, or the red imported fire ant. This is one of the most common invasive species of ants that you could find out here in Florida, and they are extremely generalist in terms of their habitat preference. So generalist, in fact, that this is probably the most common ant to be found in and around urban areas, in people's backyards. They love areas of open grass that basically have no real discernible qualities, especially people's lawns. This is because these are very similar to the open grasslands down in their native ranges in South America, but they're not only limited to these open grassy areas. They could also be found in marshes, wooded areas, swamps, basically anywhere that is not completely dried out and sandy because of the kind of habitat that they live in South America, which are these grassy areas known as floodplains. On this tube, I have here a few minor workers, a few major workers, which are the ones with a larger size head and a larger, more stocky build, and a queen.
Well, now that we have our invicta with us, all we need to do is find some geminata and get a nice side-by-side comparison between the two species. Sounds easy, right? Well, not really. It just so happens that Solenopsis geminata is far less noticeable than invicta and only really lives in some of the driest, sandiest, and most pristine scrub habitats left in Florida. Except for a population in the Florida Keys that seems to have taken up dark wooded hammock environments. So let's head out into the scrub and try and find this elusive ant.
The reason we have to look in this scrub habitat far from pretty much any human touch is actually quite interesting. It's thought that at one point, these tropical fire ants were actually common throughout pretty much every habitat in Florida and also the southeastern United States. But the ruthless invasion of the red imported fire ant has displaced these tropical fire ants into regions that are either unsuitable for invicta to nest in because they're too hot and dry, or regions that invicta simply hasn't colonized yet. While biologically this is interesting, I mean, it's literally like a war is unfolding before our eyes. This is unfortunately making our search for Solenopsis geminata much, much harder.
Thankfully, we weren't alone out here in the field. Some local experts on these northern Florida ants offered to help in our search for this rare fire ant. This is Nolan, he has a shovel. And this is Miles, he has a YouTube channel. Go subscribe, link in the description. Now with 6 trained ant watching eyes and 3 brains of ant knowledge, finding this ant should be much easier. And it wasn't long before we stumbled across not one, but many of their colonies.
These little tunnels in the sand beneath me are the super distinctive tracks left behind by Solenopsis geminata, our main target fire ant. Following these little arms of the colony should lead us to where the main mound is located.
And sure enough, there it is, a beautiful colony of tropical fire ants. With the trusty help of Nolan's shovel, we should be able to find all of the individuals we need to have a perfect side-by-side comparison to the red fire ants.
It has been a long time coming, after a lifetime of finding Solenopsis invicta everywhere I go, and never this species. This is a few individuals, a queen, a few major workers, and a few minor workers of Solenopsis geminata, the tropical fire ant. While this is also an invasive species, just like Solenopsis invicta, these probably originating from Central and South America, just like invicta, their populations here in Florida are indeed struggling because of outcompetition by Solenopsis invicta. Invicta has a much better time surviving in the more flooded areas in Florida, which basically restricts these Solenopsis geminata to some of the most well-preserved sandy scrub habitats like the one we're in right now here in northern Florida. I'm going to take these out of here so that way we can compare them with the Solenopsis invicta side by side But just looking at them in here, they're significantly larger. The major workers have this massive and impressive blocky head, and they're more of a golden color. This coloration isn't entirely an accurate way to tell the difference, because some populations here in Florida are entirely black or dark brown. So let's take a side-by-side look at these two amazing ants.
Now that we have the two queens side by side, we can really see the difference between these two species. While Invicta has a smaller, rounder head, Geminata has a significantly blockier head that is bilobed in the back. Overall, Geminata's queen is slightly larger. Something interesting Nolan told me is that throughout his research on the interaction between these two species, he has actually spotted these two species attacking and killing each other's queens. The differences between the queens are even more amplified in the major workers. Majors are the individuals of an ant colony that are larger in size than the average worker, and oftentimes are referred to as soldiers. They usually have a larger head due to having more mandible muscles packed into the sides of their head. But the way these muscles are structured, and therefore the way the head looks, is completely different between these two species' major workers. On Invicta, the head is relatively small and rounded, while on Geminata, the head is straight up rectangular and absolutely massive compared to the rest of the body. Since I've noticed Geminata has a significantly weaker sting than Invicta, the sheer mandible strength of these massive major workers should at least make up for that somewhat. Just like with the queens, the major workers of Geminata are on average larger than those of Invicta, though there is high variability in the sizes of both. Finally, these differences are almost completely muted in the minor workers, which are pretty much identical. I've noticed in this population, Geminata minors were larger and more brightly colored than Invicta minors, but these almost certainly won't work to tell the difference in other areas of range overlap between these two species due to the variability in color and size throughout each individual species' range.
Alright, I hope you enjoyed learning about this incredibly interesting interaction between two different fire ant species here in Florida. I know this is something I wasn't expecting to travel all this way to do, but I'm glad I did. And I hope you learned a thing or two about these amazing ants as well. Special thanks to Nolan and Miles for making this video possible. I couldn't have done it without your invaluable help.
If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to check out this video right here, where we find some of Florida's leaf-cutting ants in northern Florida. Enjoy!